Hey, it's me, Emma. You're not going to be seeing much of me sad, but my mom tried to make a 4-part series, but she only got through half of the first part, and she was like, oh, it's getting a little long. That's why she stopped. And then she's posting it. Yeah. And make sure to watch part 1, and next week, part 2. Let's get into it.
Welcome to Living in 3D Power. Discover your truth, discern your path, determine your power. I'm Dr. Amber Sessoms, and together, let's unlock our power, build authentic connections, and foster collective liberation. Hey y'all, this week's episode is unfolding differently than I expected. And honestly, I'm glad. I sat down to record a single episode where I read all 4 parts of my Substack series, intros on the cost and the calling of living in your truth, and respond in real time to the questions I posed to you. But after just the first 2 letters, I had to stop, y'all. Not because I couldn't finish, but because I needed to honor the weight of what was rising. So this is part 1. In it, I read from the first 2 reflections, choosing integrity over appeasement and emotional honesty is leadership. And I respond out loud, unscripted, to the questions I invited you to sit with. And next week, I'll return for part 2 with the final 2 letters. If you've been holding questions that won't let go, this episode is for you. Let's begin. Hey y'all, welcome back to episode 20 of Living in 3D Power. And because we're on episode 20, and because of this season I'm in right now and the wonderings and the curiosity that's coming up, I wanted to do something a little bit different today. Typically I do like a really brief recap or an opening, and then Emma and I sit down for a conversation. Today, however, I'm going to be doing my own work. As my therapist always says, you have to do your work, right? And this started me on a journey years and years ago when I led a retreat for a bunch of phenomenal leaders. And before the retreat, she said to me, when are you going to start doing the work you do with your clients? And it just was a gut punch to me. But it was an invitation to really start leaning in and not being so outward focused on the curiosity that I have, being curious about myself. So I always pose to you, if you're following me on Substack, a list of curiosity questions or prompts. I have curiosity cards that I do with my clients, and I give that to you as well if you're a subscriber. And that's kind of what we do with Emma every week. We ask the questions and she just gives some profound wisdom and we make meaning from that. But I thought for this episode, what I would do was ask myself my own questions. So I'm going to be my own coach, the coach getting coached. And I think it's just a beautiful invitation for me, one, to pause, and also to hopefully invite you into the same practice. Sometimes we can just go through the rote routine of things. And I find myself doing this too, even when I write my thoughtful weekend roundups. The questions that I pose, I don't always sit down and ask them and answer them myself. So I wanted to take some time to go through that and see what comes up for me. So this is unscripted. It's just whatever emerges. And that's the beauty of it. Whatever emerges for you, I just invite you to lean into that. So as you're listening today, there might be moments that you want to pause after I ask a question. Maybe you will pause along with me and answer the same question and come back to it. So I hope this is an invitation for you to dig in. And the 4-part series was titled The Cost and Calling of Living in Your Truth. And I've been through it, y'all, for the last couple of weeks. And there's no better way for me to really unpack that than to write about it. But also I need to just take a minute and pause and be present to really answer what's coming up for me. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to read the intro to each of those 4 weekend roundups, and then I'm going to go into one question from each of my power tool phrases or my power to questions, my curiosity cards, and I'm going to do one from discovery, discernment, and determination for each one of those. And we're going to see what comes up for me. And I just want to say that I started each post with the following message. So this kind of gives you some grounding on what we're going to talk about today. In this moment, I'm reflecting on the cost and the calling of living in your truth, especially when institutions, families, and cultures ask you to stay silent. Too often, what gets mistaken for a healthy workplace is really manufactured harmony. Behind the polished branding and carefully scripted morale, real concerns are buried and dignity is deferred. This 4-part reflection will explore 1, how truth disrupts the illusion of contentment, 2, how emotional honesty is leadership, 3, how cultures of silence betray missions, and 4, how we can dream new structures rooted in dignity and human value. The world doesn't change by accident. It changes when one brave voice honors their humanity and in doing so becomes a call others can answer. My life's work has always been about honoring that call, that sacred echo. So with that, I'll be answering the questions I pose to you, honoring my own humanity in real time. So let's get into it. Okay. So part 1 of the 4-part series was titled Choosing Integrity Over Appeasement, Why I Keep Speaking Even When It's Hard. And part of that subtitle was Why Silence Isn't Strength and Why Truth-Telling is an Act of Love. So here goes the intro. At my Uncle Percy's birthday dinner, Graham looked at me with that familiar smile and said, "You've always said what was on your mind since you were a kid." The whole room burst into laughter, and so did I, because she was right. And if you're looking at the Substack or you've read that or you go to it as you're journeying with me, you'll see a picture of little Amber and Graham around 1983. So I was about 2 years old, my little chunky self. And it's just a reminder that I've always born to be curious. I call myself a perpetual toddler because I ask a lot of questions and I say the things that are really on my heart, because it's an invitation for people to be true to who they are as human beings. So I go on to say, even as a child, I had a deep knowing. I could feel when something was off in the room. I couldn't always name it then, but I saw the unspoken. I felt the unshed tears. I watched when adults bit their tongues to keep the peace, even as it chipped away at their spirits. That silence, it didn't protect them. It morphed into explosions, passive aggression, emotional shutdown, a performance of appropriateness that masked pain and perpetuated dehumanization. This knowing has always lived in me. It's not new, but it's never been easy to carry. Lately, I've been reminded of how hard it is for truth-telling to land in spaces that aren't ready to receive it. When I harvest the wisdom of employees and community members through learning cohorts, focus groups, strategic planning, storytelling, surveys, and healing circles, leadership often hears those truths for the first time. And it's jarring. Defensiveness rises and sometimes even disbelief. I'm told things like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. That is a runaway phrase from every leader. I'm not sure where they're learning that in leadership school, but it is a common phrase. But that's not strategy. That's a symptom of emotional dysregulation in spaces where silence was the norm until I arrived. And still, I choose to speak because silence has never protected us. Truth is not the problem, avoidance is. All right, so let's dig into some of the questions I pose to you as my readers. And the first one is, who taught me that keeping quiet was the respectable thing to do? When I look back at that picture in 1983, it starts in the home. It starts with people that you emulate that care for you. And most of my upbringing was centered around women. We didn't have a lot of men in our family that I was around on a regular basis that really were emotionally intelligent and attuned. So for me, what I learned was from the women in my life, really strong, powerful Black women who were the heads of their families. And so this idea about what is respectable, I often think back to, I am the geriatric millennial. I'm not sure what the more euphemistic kind term is for me kind of starting off that generation. in 1981. But I was raised by my grandparents. And so those 1940s babies grew up in an era, especially Black people, that you wear your Sunday's best, that if you present yourself in a certain way, you are more likely to be respected as seen as human. And what we know, right, we can look throughout history to present day, is that's not true, right? I can think of the times that even with all the degrees, all the things that I have, that I'm still disrespected. And people will go out of their way to not call me Dr. Sessoms in public meetings, but they will go around and call my white counterparts doctor in the same meeting. So this idea of keeping quiet and being respectable comes from the idea of my positionality and how I was raised with Black women, and how in certain situations, particularly in more professional spaces, in order to be professional, we have to maintain this level of respectability. So if we are dismissed, dehumanized, if there are racist things that are said to us or misogynistic things that are said to us, we smile and grin and bear it, is something that I wasn't intentionally taught, but I could see it play out. I could also see it being reinforced by the society that we live in, learning that an Amber who is a Black girl who takes up space and who's expansive is not welcomed in a lot of spaces, particularly where I grew up in central Pennsylvania in predominantly white spaces. So I really learned this idea of keeping quiet from that. And also because I would say the thing, and I still do, as you know, I just read about, you've always said that. And my family, yes, Amber has. It's not always met with love. It's met with that defensiveness. And that's not something that I like how that feels. And I'm sure the receiver, when I'm asking the question, when I'm leaning into curiosity, I call it compassionate curiosity, is willing to embody and take on. Defensiveness is real. So learning this respectability is also a matter of not being that angry Black woman. And me being direct is often equated with being an angry Black woman. And that couldn't be farther from the case. I'm just saying the thing, I'm being direct. When my white counterparts can do that, and they are not met with the same stereotypical lens as me, it makes you question your ability to speak truth. And in which rooms should you even utter that? And so what I'm learning in this moment is that not every space, and this is what my colleague and friend Ellen Min will say, deserves you. If you can't be yourself when you walk into a space, that space doesn't deserve you. I often ask, and I think I've said it on this podcast before, what part of me am I leaving at the door before I walk in? And the parts that I leave out, if I have to be disembodied and be disconnected from my entire being, you're missing out on the greatness that I have. So I really try to really honor that and say, what parts of me am I leaving out? Why? Why are they not welcome? And can I live without those pieces? And for often, a lot of times, there were spaces where I would smile and grin and bear it at times. But I have learned that telling the truth in real time and not naming it in terms of, here's how I often approach it. So I don't often, if someone says something demoralizing, dehumanizing, racist, I don't call it out and say, that was racist. What I typically do is I pose a question. What do you mean by that? Tell me more. Or I noticed, I'll lean in with that curiosity. I have a colleague that says, you never make a statement. You always ask a question. And questions, I believe, are an invitation. So that's when I lean into it. So this idea of being respectable is an idea of like, let's lean into that curiosity. You just disrespected me. Now I want to lean into that. Or sometimes, very recently, I'll pose it when someone says something that's harmful. I'll say, well, I'm seeing a through line, or I'm seeing a connection. So say in the workplace culture, if the leader is confirming a narrative about them, I'll often say, oh, you know what, that after talking with your staff and doing focus groups and the emerging themes that are coming out of these meetings, that's actually confirming the narrative that they have about you. And what I'm here to do is humanize you as a full person. You're not just CEO, you're not just superintendent, you're not just president. You are a whole person. And sometimes even we in these leadership roles, we take on the title and not the personhood underneath of it. So it's an invitation for CEOs, superintendents, presidents to recognize their humanity and also to recognize there's a narrative that's out about them because the staff see them as their title. And what I'm here to do is shift and disrupt that narrative into writing a new story where they can be seen in their full humanity. And when they can be seen in their humanity as a leader, it therefore invites them to see others as human. But it's hard, y'all. It is very hard. But that's what I think of, and that's what's coming up for me for that first question. So again, as you're thinking through these questions, what's coming up for you? Does what I say connect? Is it completely different? What came up for you in that question about who taught me that keeping quiet was the respectable thing to do? All right, so question 2. How do my values guide me when critique feels personal? Okay, so my values are authenticity, connection, curiosity, leadership, and liberation. And I have a very real example of this that I continue and I will hold dear to me forever. But when I was co-chair of a diversity organization in our area, I co-presented. I can't remember what the presentation was about, but I decided that I was going to show a visual, is it a GIF or a GIF, y'all? I always get that wrong. It's GIF, but I don't know. That image where kind of like loops through of Marvel movie Doctor Strange. Now, we are Marvel people in this house, thanks to my husband. So we watch all the movies. And in this particular movie, I don't remember what her name is. Is she the chosen one? I don't know. I'm getting it confused now because it's a couple years old. But she does this astral push where she pushes Doctor Strange out of his body. She pushes him out of his body. And it's this astral push where he comes out, his spirit comes out of his body and he's looking at his body. And I was using that as an example to show how we have to create spatial awareness, how we have to be the observers of what's going on in our own being, not so much everyone around us, but be the observer of ourselves. And not so much attach labels and judgments to what's happening. Just witness it, being a witness to how life is unfolding. What I didn't realize was that was racist. So after we had our leadership meeting, we did the presentation, I thought it went really well. I get an email from my colleague and friend, and she's like, "Can I talk to you?" And she says to me, our AAPI community was offended by the image that you used. And I'm like, ooh, and I'm leaning into it. And she says, it was yellowface. So you probably heard of blackface, right? You have the images of white people that would paint their faces with tar and would do really pejorative and racist, stereotypical things about Black people. There's also yellowface. So that is the Asian community, and white people would pretend or do these really stereotypical things for Asian people, and we call it yellowface. So I had to do my own research. So what you can do when you're called upon, when you're called on, you can get defensive. You can, if you want to. But here's where I'm leaning into my values. My values are authenticity, connection, curiosity, leadership, and liberation. So if I were to be approached and someone to say, that was racist, that was really harmful to people, they were offended, and me to be like, you're being overly sensitive. Of course, they're going to come at the Black woman. I can't ever get a break. Everyone wants to critique me. I could do that. I wouldn't be aligned with my values, right? But what I did is, because I'm trying to be, and Sonia Renee Taylor talks about this, my job is to be in right relationship with you. So if you call me in, I have to take a deep breath and look inward, create that spatial awareness that I was using that image for, to really interrogate myself. It was an invitation to be in right relationship. She cared enough about me, and the people cared enough about me to call me in to be in better alignment. So what I did was I had to do the research. I didn't ask her to do it. You know how this came after, and now we're on the 5th year anniversary of George Floyd's death. I can't even believe it's been 5 years. But that most recent racial awakening that happened, and now here we are in the backlash of it all. But after George Floyd's heinous murder, which I will never, ever watch, this whole new resurgence came when everyone wants to be DEI, everyone wants to be focused on diversity, equity, inclusion. And there was a notion that, particularly for my white counterparts, they're like, I think everyone wanted to be my friend. I had people that I hadn't heard from since high school or in my early 20s that reached out to me on Facebook or DM me and said, I really hope that I never hurt you or offended you when we were in school or when I saw you. I'm really trying to be a better person. And that really came because Black people, co-conspirators, were so angry that they were like, white people, do your work. Here's where the fallout happens, though. There was also a caveat of white people do your work, but realize that Black people are the experts of their own experience. So what happened was a lot of white people were like, I don't know what to do. I'm looking for you to lead and to guide. And we did that a lot. A lot of these DEI positions came out of that, and they were on the backs of Black and brown people. And now what we're seeing with people losing their jobs left and right because of this DEI backlash, that emotional labor that Black and brown people had to hold on top of just being in their lived experience of being Black, and also not having the support they needed and not it being foundational, embedded into the systems, it was destined to fail from the beginning. But what happened was, tell me what to do and I'll do it. Give me the framework and I'll do it. And this wave was figure it out, Google it. So you had all that. And I took my own advice, right? I was like, let me Google this and do the work. And I did the work. I found out that the original comic for Doctor Strange was a racist Chinese man. And you can just imagine it, right? Because we've seen it all the time. And what they did, what Marvel did was like, we're going to be new age and forward thinking. We're going to change it from a racist Chinese man to a white woman. And I swear to you, I did not know that history. So there's the yellow face that came in. But when I did my history, what I did was I wrote it up. I showed the history. I did my research. I presented that in a document and I owned it to the entire organization. I didn't just go back to those few AIPI people that were in the room. I addressed everyone in the room, because here's what happens. When we do things that dehumanize people, we are sending a message to everyone that's bearing witness to that. So what I had to do as a leader was make it right, and therefore send the message to everyone. And that is how you repair harm. That is how you lessen yourself and say, I'm not above, right? I do this work. I live this work. And guess what? I'm still going to make mistakes because I still have privilege and I still have blind spots because of the identities that I do hold. So that is a way that I use my values to guide me. This person's coming to me and I can tell, right? Even if a person is just wanting to critique, just to critique, and there is racism, misogyny behind it, I still, even in that moment, and I have a colleague that's like, I don't know how you do it. You better than me, right? How do you, when they're critiquing you, still lean into the curiosity? There's something for me to learn about how to be a better leader, how to be a better consultant, a better human in showing up. But I can take the meat, spit out the fat. But I do lean into that because I'm a curious person. Okay. The last one for this first reflection is, how might my courage to speak now create space for someone else to breathe later? I think about this, and I was recently thinking about this, y'all. My training is in school psychology, master's level. Was an undergrad psych major, African-American studies minor, psychology master's, school psych certification. And then I went on to my doctorate in adult education. So I go birth to earth. But in terms of school psychology and being a practicing school psychologist for nearly 13 years in a large suburban high school with about 1,900 students, there is nothing I didn't learn from that job. The amount of grief in terms of physically losing students, colleagues losing their children, just crisis response. I did crisis response for another number of years, suicide prevention and postvention, which is after a death by suicide, students that were violated in the most egregious ways, students that had parents that were very homophobic, students who had parents that were very transphobic, and they might have had intersecting identities in terms of being Muslim and trans. I mean, I could list it all and people would be shocked. But that's where I first learned real life on the job is to name it and hold space, and it gives people courage to say the same. When I could name and see what they were going through, giving people the courage to speak up. And I might have to put a disclaimer on this episode, but thinking about a particular student, this was coming up very recently with Cassie. And I had a colleague that was talking about being a middle school teacher and having a student that was talking about her being violated by a male and how everyone turned on that little girl. And I have a very real experience about a student who came to me, and I knew instantly when I saw her father walk in the room that something was wrong. And in Pennsylvania, the student has to tell it, right? They have to tell it. I can report it, which I did multiple times. I didn't have the evidence, but I just knew, and whatever observable thing I would report. And she still had to say it, and she still didn't want to say it. And I continued to work with her. And what finally got through to her is that when I just let her be raw and real and honest, and how that anger surfaced. She didn't allow herself to be angry about the abuse that she had been suffering since the age of 4, and now she was in high school. And what she was doing as the victim was protecting her family because she didn't want her family to be separated. The amount of victims that take on that role is just, I don't know what data's on that, but that is a very real thing for victims. They will continue to be abused. They will continue to suffer and at the expense of their safety so that they can protect those. And what had to be rebuilt in her was that she also deserved that. And that her speaking the truth, whatever might come from that, and family did turn. But I tell you what, he's in jail, as he should be, because he harmed her in unimaginable ways. But those are things I think about, giving the courage to speak. That real life, I don't think you can be through anything harder in your workplace, and then to hold space. And being a school psychologist, thinking like that's for, clinics, or that's for outward facing groups, but this is happening in schools. That prepared me to do this work with leaders and thinking about how I hold space for clients, for leaders. And when staff are telling me the harm that they're experiencing in the workplace, where community is telling me the harm they're experiencing in the workplace, and I have to bring that back to the leaders and say, here's what's happening. Here's what people are naming. Can we hold space for that? And before that, just holding space for the clients, the staff, to name something that they have been allowing to sit in their chest and in their gut for far too long is the liberation. And remember, that's one of my values. And every time what I tell the leadership is, you might be in a tough spot now. And most of the time people will bring me in when workplace dynamics are really, really bad, where their employee engagement surveys are low, where they've had a big rupture, where they may have had to terminate people, where they might have had someone that violated something on the workforce, where they had leadership leave, or they've been in the paper, right? I've experienced it all. And I'm telling you, based on what I've done in my 13 years at school psych, none of that can shake me. So when I come in and have these conversations with leaders, I'll say, you will see morale is so low. People hate that though. They hate when I say morale is low, or they'll name that and leaders get really upset. What do you mean morale is low? They got great benefits. They get summers off if you're in a school. They get X, Y, and Z. They get all these things. What are they complaining about? They're complaining because they're still being dehumanized, and you don't see them. They're being devalued in their fullness. So when I can create that space, when I can hold space for them, I'm telling you, every time, it doesn't matter how poor it is. I'm talking major layoffs, major violations. I hear it from everyone. I wasn't sure about this, but you gave me hope. And that's what we're looking for in this society, particularly in today, when, oh my gosh, the recklessness and the violence that's going on in this country at the hands of fear and white supremacy have left people with this consuming rage and despair and grief. And my job is to uproot that, to hold space for that, to hold it and to let it just be because it's real. We can't just be, I'm not Pollyanna, I'm not coming in and be like, it's not that bad. No, it is. It is that bad, y'all. And when we can hold space and name that individually in community, we can then move towards a sense of hope, because what that does is it lets you know that you're not alone. The reason that this divisiveness is so paramount is it's intentional. Let's divide us. Let's say group A, group B. But what we find is when we're in community and I have people from different perspectives in community, we can name the same thing. And when we can name the same thing, I can say, I see you, and I can band with you. I can build community with you, and healing happens in community. And language and discourse and me being able to articulate what I'm feeling happens in community. I didn't have the language for that thing that I was feeling, and you just gave me the language. You just described exactly what I've been feeling for 4 years. Oh my gosh, I thought I was all alone. That is a gift, y'all. And that's what we bring when we have the courage to have those brave spaces and people to speak up. That is what I love to do, is cultivate that space so someone else can breathe easier. And it is a ripple effect, and it takes off. And I love seeing that with my former students, with my colleagues who are now in leadership positions and councils and running for offices, because they had the courage to join a part of the community that felt underserved and felt unheard. And they decided to speak up. And in their speaking up and naming their pain, it unleashed something in them that they then became alive so that other people wouldn't experience that. And they could cultivate spaces on a larger level to make sure people could be seen. So that stuff excites me, especially in light of me just seeing the election results for my local city. And one of those council people being one of my former colleagues that had the courage to speak truth, and look at her now. I'm super proud of that. So yes, we're going to move on to part 2. Part 2 was emotional honesty as leadership, lessons from tears, tenderness, and truth. What my daughter's courage taught me about reclaiming emotional truth. So here's the intro. This week, my daughter Emma reminded me that truth doesn't always arrive in polished words. Sometimes it breaks through tears we didn't even know we were holding. We had originally planned to sit down and talk about Easter and the compassion, love, and renewal Jesus embodies. But Emma asked to pivot. She wanted to talk about something else, a moment that had hurt her heart. Earlier that day, after a painful exchange with her sister, Emma stormed out of the room. There was no screaming, but there was a low grumble under her breath, which was the sound that carried all the hurt she didn't yet have words for. In her room, she quietly colored on her iPad until the storm inside her began to settle. When we started filming, Emma seemed composed at first, but as she shared her story, the tears welled up. Without a word, she climbed into my lap. Her body spoke before her voice could, and sitting there holding her, I remembered. The real work isn't rushing people to explain their pain. It's creating enough emotional safety that when they are ready, they know they'll be met with compassion instead of defensiveness. It's no different in the spaces I work to support. Employees who fall silent because they've been punished or feel the threat of punishment. New leaders who hesitate to question harmful norms and remain complicit to maintain power. Communities told to be grateful instead of honest. They aren't disconnected from the mission, but they are disconnected from their humanity. They are using silence as a survival apparatus to protect the parts of themselves they aren't sure will be honored. In that tender moment with Emma, she didn't need correction. She needed connection, both internally and externally. As adults, we need the same to thrive, because sometimes the first act of courage is not just leaving the room to protect your truth, but returning when you feel safe enough to share. Ooh. And if you just saw when Emma just climbed into my lap and just cried and cried and cried, and that was the release she needed to speak her truth. Emma is very emotionally attuned, and she will share her emotions, y'all, and she's giving you an invitation to do the same. So here are the curiosity questions, some that were posed for this weekend roundup. Where was I taught that silence was safer than honesty? And going back to what I said before about being a Black woman, right? That's where I'm told. So in a very recent example, I was talking to a friend about my experience with this recent client where I had to actually terminate the contract. And talking about that, her husband approached and he just got part of the conversation, but he said, "Do you think there was something that you could have done, to like bridge that, to like make it, turn out differently?" And I responded by saying, I have learned in this Black female body, because what I was taught was that my safety is something that I'll never have. I will never feel safe. I always have to fight. I always have to be on guard and hypervigilant. But what I'm learning and inviting in is, right, what a softer amber is, and also learning and inviting is that I deserve to have my dignity and my humanity honored. So when I'm in situations as a consultant, which here's where the big red flags come up for me. If I'm a consultant and coming in and I feel unsafe because people are not critiquing, but criticizing, demeaning, degrading, questioning in a way that tries to undermine the work that I came to do, I will have the meeting. I will lean into curiosity to get to the bottom of it. But if there are consistent examples from the leadership that they would rather lean into harm than to actually do the work of repair, I'm not going to stay in that situation and continue to dehumanize myself for the sake of, I don't know, what, a contract for money. I won't do it. And I had to learn that the hard way, because I have been harmed in this work, y'all. I'm talking about being on a national radio show, equating my work to gang violence and selling drugs, to people trying to smear me on the news station, to starting websites about my work based off of complete hysteria and this connection. They made this giant leap to someone else and thought that I was being the agitator, which is interesting because that has come up again. But here's what happens. When you are a truth teller, you're giving a license for other people to do the same. And people connect back with that because we don't tell a lot of truth in this society to the point where we're inviting you to do your own work. When I keynote, I find that this happens. And I have a colleague and friend that will say to me, you make people cry. And I'm like, that's not my intent. And I'm just really weaving in my own personal story. And when I do that, what that's doing is, you might not have any connection to my personal story, right? But what it does, it is an invitation. I'm extending to you to really look inward about your own lived experience and how you show up in the world. And that's just what I do. And what that does in people, it makes people uncomfortable, right? If you're not willing to do that, if you're busy pointing the finger at everyone else, when even if you have a tremendous amount of data that's pointing back to you, but if you can continue to point your finger at everyone else because you would rather maintain your power and your privilege and hide behind a mission instead of really living into your values. And that's something that I will not betray myself for. So I'm very clear with clients that I will only work with courageous leaders. And if you show me that you can't be courageous, which means that you have to be value-centered, which means that you have to be willing to look inward and to do that real work and understand that vulnerability is a part of the work. If you can't do that, then I'm not a good fit for you, right? Then you'd be better off with a once and done seminar, feel good something, but not doing this deep level work that I really hold my entire being to. So that is that. So safety, yes, I will no longer sacrifice my safety. I deserve that simply because I'm human. Okay, so the second question is, where am I being invited to create braver spaces for truth telling? Everywhere. I just gave several examples. I think the way that I'm wired and my experiences and how my grandmother said, you've always been like this. I have to be true. Again, one of my values, authenticity. If I'm showing up authentically, it's leaning into that compassionate curiosity. It's finding a way to help others unlock what they've deeply buried in them in their silence and their pain and their grief, thinking that the world can't be differently, thinking about their workplace can't be differently, thinking about, well, I got this paycheck, so I should just be happy. You deserve to be honored for your humanity. No amount of money. I don't care if you're a millionaire. I don't care if you're making six figures. We attach salary to I can treat you however I want to treat you. And here's the thing, y'all. Here's what I've been thinking about a lot recently is that I can't remember if it was a documentary or not. It might have been 1619 or maybe I can't remember. But there was a documentary, it might have been in the book. And they were talking about how the workforce models how we treat employees off of their plantation. So plantation owners kept amazing records of productivity based off of enslaved people. You know, they could see how many hours, whatever they pulled pounds or whatever cotton that they did that day. And that's what they would do for productivity. Tell me we don't do that today in terms of productivity. And tell me those of us that think our value is based on what we produce. And we get that paycheck. So here we go through that cycle. There are so many leaders today operating as plantation owners. Y'all, the level of harm we are causing in the workplace because we think that we can just churn people like machines is so egregious. And it pains me to no end that we have bought into this. We as a society have brought into, and I'll say, maybe it's Gen Z, maybe Gen Z still like a little bit like they're more critically conscious about how the world works. Definitely the younger generation. They are not buying into that you are going to have me on this plantation doing this work and not respect me. No amount of money will allow me to be disrespected. So there's something to be said about that. Like, how do we create these braver spaces for truth telling? And it's really that. So when I can hold space, when people can name that, what I do is I make meaning from it and I hear these emerging themes. So in school psychology and psychology, we learned quantitative data. And then in adult education, what I did was I did qualitative. So we make meaning from people's lived experiences. And we find the emerging things when we reach the point of saturation, when we replicate it, when we talk more and more, we're like, oh, this is an emerging theme. This fits into this framework. Here's what I'm seeing. And here's how we can move towards a better structure that can support everyone in the workplace. That is the beauty of creating a braver space. And that's the invitation that I do. And the third question is, where might I be called to protect someone's courage instead of rushing to correct them? So thinking about Emma and how she just cried in my lap. And I think one of the things like that is beautiful is just holding space for people. Whatever comes up, let it come up. Let's not put judgment to it. Back to that spatial awareness. You as the person who's holding the space have to navigate and do your own self-soothing work. If you can look back at the video, I think you might see that I was taking some deep breaths, if you can see that, because I'm navigating my own emotions as she's having an emotional moment. And me grounding myself allows me to be in the present and to not blow past what she's feeling to get myself to a place of safety. And that's what we'll do when we're in discomfort. We are no longer looking at the person that's experiencing the harm or naming their harm. We then turned it back to us. This is why I always say decenter yourself, center the other person. There's no greater gift we give people than when they're speaking the truth and we believe them. When we don't make it about us, when we don't get defensive and say, that's not how it really is. And going back to that example earlier when I was talking to a friend and her husband interjected, like, is there something you could have done? It was irritating because, one, you didn't hear the whole story. And two, why are we so quick to put the onus on the person being caused the harm to then find a way to say, can you harm me a little bit less? Right? I often think about that, like in terms of racism and sexism and all the things, like we will accept these breadcrumbs from policies or procedures or whatever that don't address the root of the issue. And in school psychology, it's root cause analysis, right? We get to the root, then we solve the actual issue and we make meaning from that and we make meaningful change. But oftentimes we'll hear from people when there's a rupture, we'll do the performative thing and say, okay, now we're going to make space to hear you. We hear them and then we go back to our ivory tower, we make the decisions, and then we put it out there and the people being caused the harm are like, that doesn't even make any sense. Y'all gave me a dress down Friday. Okay. And then we buy into it and we say, well, damn if you do, damn if you don't. I guess I should be happy with that. And it goes back into the cycle. We accept breadcrumbs, people from the margins. And what we are in this moment is saying, no more. I deserve to have my full humanity honored and my voice to be heard and amplified to help you and lead you to decisions that are on behalf of our entire organization that will help. I have wisdom from my lived experience that you need. You invited me into this organization. You hired me, which means you get all of me, and all of me belongs here. And that wisdom that I hold is going to help drive your organization forward. And that is the beauty of it, y'all. When you hold space for people and you honor the fullness of who they are, you will get a better community, a better, holistic, regulated, emotionally intelligent community where everyone gets to thrive. And we no longer sit on the plantation calculating who is the most productive. Productivity does not equate to being fully human. Thank you for staying with me through part 1 of this reflection, this work of telling the truth unapologetically, without polishing it, without rushing through it, is slow and sacred. So I'll be back next week for part 2, where I'll reflect on rupture, restoration, and the work of building something rooted in dignity. But for now, I invite you to sit with what came up for you. Journal your own answers. Speak them, whisper them, because living in your 3D power means living with your full truth. One breath, one question, one brave moment at a time. I'll see you next week, and remember to keep discovering your truth, discerning your path, and determining your power.
So, did you like it? Maybe you can answer some of the questions as you go. Maybe you did. Make sure to like and subscribe. Bye, y'all.